The first Halloween murder takes place in Napa, California, 2004. After a night of staying in and passing out candy to the neighborhood kids, the three roommates, Adrian and Sonia, Leslie Marza, and Lauren Meanza, decided to head to bed at 11 o'clock. The three girls were the best of friends, truly enjoyed each other's company, and after living together, their bond only grew stronger. At 1:30 in the morning, Lauren awoke to loud screaming. She stepped outside of her bedroom to see where it was coming from. What she saw was a man coming around the corner, sprinting directly after her. Her flight mode kicked in, and she ran directly out the back door of the house. Unable to jump the fence that enclosed the backyard, Lauren hid in the thick bushes nearby. Fortunately for her, the strange man didn't give chase. Lauren continued to hide in the bushes as she heard blood-curdling screams coming from inside the house. Moments later, she sees the intruder exiting the home through a downstairs window. Now that the threat is gone, she runs back into the house. Lauren enters Adrian's bedroom and discovers a blood-soaked mess where the bodies of her two friends have been stabbed to death. The three girls didn't have any enemies. Who could have done this? It didn't make any sense. What was the motive? Because it was dark, Lauren never got a good look at the man. All detectives had to go on was a couple of cigarette butts that were found outside the same window the intruder was seen leaving. But with no suspects, there's no other DNA to compare it with. As the case begins to turn cold, a man named Eric Kopel and his wife Lily Prudhomme walk into the Napa police station, and Kopel confesses to the two gruesome murders. Who is this man? What connection did he have with the three girls? Turns out his wife Lily was friends with Adrian. Kopel accompanied Lily over to the girls' house when they first moved in. Now besides that, he never had much interaction with the girls. So what was the motive? Kopel never really gave one. But what we do know is this. Eric Kopel and Lily Prudhomme planned on getting married on November 1st, the day after Adrian and Leslie were murdered. But on that Halloween night, Eric and Lily got into a huge argument, so much so it led to Lily postponing the wedding. Eric says he believed his entire life was disintegrating in front of him. He drank heavily that night, and a man with a history of depression and violent tendencies, something bad was bound to happen. But no one, including Eric, could tell you exactly why it led to this. He was arrested and booked. And just to confirm Eric's story, detectives tested his DNA to the cigarette butts that were found outside the home, and sure enough, it was a perfect match. To avoid the death penalty, Eric pled guilty to 2 counts of capital murder. During his sentencing, friends and family of Adrian and Leslie were given a chance to speak directly to Eric, including Adrian's friend and his wife, Lily Prudhomme. It's hard to fathom your friend being murdered at the hands of a man you vowed to love for the rest of your life, and now getting to say one last thing to him before he's off to spend the rest of his life in prison. Then, an emotional Eric was given the opportunity to address everyone and all the pain he caused.
I am a broken man.
No one cares. He was given 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Halloween night 1975. Ronald O'Brien deliberately poisoned his own son in order to collect $20,000 from a secret life insurance policy he had purchased just months prior. Before heading out to trick-or-treat, Ronald O'Brien opened 5 pixie stick tubes and mixed in cyanide powder, and closed the sticks back up with a staple. Ronald and his son Timothy went trick-or-treating with his neighbor and 2 sons. The group came across one house that had all the lights off. Looking like no one was home, the boys tried anyway. Sure enough, no answer. As the group headed to the next house, Ronald stayed back and said he'd catch up with them in a bit. Ronald then rejoined the group a couple minutes later, holding 5 pixie sticks. He says someone was home after all, and they gave me these. He handed one to his son and the 2 neighbor boys, and 2 other boys they knew from church were walking by, and he gave them the poison sticks as well. After trick-or-treating, Ronald gave Timothy 1 piece of candy to eat, and it was the pixie stick. Ronald had to help Timothy open it because of the staple. Once Timothy ate it, he complained how bitter it tasted. Only moments later, Timothy was vomiting and convulsing. He was taken to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead. Autopsy revealed he had enough cyanide to kill 2 adults. Police asked what Ronald had consumed that night. Ronald showed them the pixie stick, where tests revealed there were traces of cyanide. Fortunately, the other kids that received the pixie sticks hadn't eaten them, and police got to them before any harm was done. Ronald then directs them to the house where the candy came from. Police spoke with the homeowner, but he had a solid alibi. He was an air traffic controller and didn't get off work until 11 p.m. Police shifted their focus back to Ronald. After obtaining a search warrant, they discovered a bag of cyanide in his house. Police also discovered the life insurance policy he had on Timothy, and that Ronald was trying to collect payment the next morning after he died. Police had more than enough evidence to charge him, and on June 3, 1975, he was found guilty of 1 count of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder, and was put to death on March 31, 1984. Dubbed the Toolbox Killers, Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris went on a sick, twisted killing spree in the 70s. Back then, hitchhiking wasn't a big deal, nor was it thought of as dangerous. Bittaker and Norris took advantage of this. At first, they picked up a bunch of girls in this van. Apparently, no one thought it looked suspicious. Maybe because of stories like this, we are aware that it looks like a moving crime scene. Anyways, after picking up women hitchhikers, the 2 scumbags would torture them with random tools that were in their van and eventually kill them. On Halloween 1979, their 5th victim was a 16-year-old Shirley Ledford. She was in an LA suburb and needed a ride. Unfortunately, she ran into Bittaker and Norris. Same as their other victims, they would torture and kill her. Norris actually went on to brag about what they've been doing to a former cellmate of his, a former cellmate with a conscience, because he immediately calls the cops and reports them. Authorities obtained a search warrant and found a motherload of evidence. Turns out these sick bastards took hundreds of Polaroids of their victims while brutalizing them. Not only that, they even took a 17-minute audio recording of Shirley Ledford's slow death. When arrested, Bittaker pled not guilty. Norris pled guilty, took a plea deal for 45 years to life, in exchange to testify against Bittaker. Ultimately, Bittaker was found guilty and sentenced to death. He remains on death row to this day. You might have heard this story before, since it was covered for decades on the national news. Halloween 1975. 15-year-old Martha Moxley was found dead beneath a tree outside her home, stabbed and beaten to death with a golf club. She was last seen alive with a bunch of other kids around the neighborhood on what they called mischief night. They would teepee houses, ding-dong ditch, stuff like that. The first 2 suspects that emerged were Thomas and Michael Skakel. The murder became front-page news around the country because it was in a wealthy neighborhood, and the Skakel family was friends with the Kennedys. After talking with Thomas, investigators wanted to hear Michael's whereabouts that night. Michael's story changed a few times, which raised some red flags. Then, Michael says that around midnight, he was in a tree outside of Martha Moxley's bedroom window, masturbating. Now this has to be one of the strangest alibis detectives have ever heard. But if anyone had an alibi for not murdering someone because they were masturbating in a tree, it makes sense it would come from someone with a name like Skakel. Initially, no charges were brought. The case goes cold. But over 2 decades later, they charged Michael Skakel for the murder. And on June 7, 2002, Michael was found guilty and was sentenced to 20 years to life. But the story doesn't end there. 2013, he was granted a new trial. Then 2016, Connecticut Supreme Court ruled to reinstate Skakel's conviction. And then the court reversed itself in 2018, and a new trial was ordered. Then, October 30th, 2020, the state of Connecticut announced it would not retry Skakel for Moxley's murder. What a crazy back and forth for Michael Skakel. Some great lawyers he must have had. Unfortunately, the murder of Martha Moxley officially remains unsolved. 2010, a 24-year-old William Liske Jr. went into his family's home, where he was kicked out of months prior, and murdered his dad, stepmom, and stepbrother. Later that night, 16-year-old Devin Griffin, the other stepbrother to Liske Jr., came home from church and went to his room to play video games, as he always did. After playing for a couple hours, Devin went to the kitchen to get some food. Wondering why the house was so quiet, he went to check on his mom and stepdad, and that's when he discovered their bloody, lifeless bodies. Devin sprinted outside and called for help. When the police arrived, they discovered that this was a triple homicide. Devin's brother Derek was also found dead in his bedroom. All 3 victims were shot to death. Devin told authorities that the family truck was gone, and he suspected the only person that might be capable of this was his estranged stepbrother, William Liske Jr. And there was a small cabin that the family would go to sometimes, and Liske Jr. might have taken the truck there. 150 miles away, they found William sitting on the front porch of the cabin smoking a cigarette. He was arrested and charged with 3 counts of murder. In exchange to not be given the death penalty, William pled guilty and blamed his actions on his mental health and Satan. And in March of 2015, at the age of 29, William Liske Jr. killed himself in his jail cell. Northern Hollywood, California. 35-year-old Peter Fabiano heard the doorbell ring at 11 p.m. on Halloween night, 1957. Thinking it might be one last trick-or-treater, Peter went to the door with the bowl of candy. But when Peter answered the door, it was a face-painted adult pointing a gun at him with a brown paper bag covering it. One shot to his chest, and he was dead. Police had no leads. The newspaper called it the trick-or-treat murder. 2 weeks into the investigation, police discovered a gun nearby the salon that Peter owned. When employees were questioned, a woman named Goldine Pfizer was eager to talk. Feeling the burden of guilt, she confessed to murdering Peter Fabiano. Goldine explained how she had been having an intimate relationship with Peter's wife, Joan, and both the women planned the murder together. Both Goldine and Joan pled guilty and surprisingly only sentenced to 5 years in prison. Both women lived out their lives in the LA area and died in the 1990s. This murder case gained international publicity. Even the Pope got involved. Halloween morning 1981, the slain body of 76-year-old Sister Tadia Benz was found in a second-story bedroom in the large Catholic convent in Amarillo, Texas. Autopsy revealed she was stabbed and sexually assaulted. One witness gave a description of a man running away from the convent. That description was similar to that of a 17-year-old Johnny Frank Garrett, who lived across the street from the convent. Police say the knife that was found at the scene had fingerprints that matched Garrett's. Garrett was given a mental health evaluation and was described as experts as one of the most virulent histories of abuse and neglect I've ever encountered in my 28 years of practice. Garrett maintained his innocence. Still, Garrett went to trial and was found guilty and was sentenced to the death penalty. The other nuns at the convent and even Pope John Paul II begged the governor of Texas to spare his life. After years of legal battles to not kill the 17-year-old at the time of the murder, the ruling eventually was upheld, and on February 11, 1992, Johnny Frank Garrett was put to death by lethal injection.